Thanks for tuning in to Minds of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and with me today I have a special guest. He's the CTO of Government Blockchain Association, and he's also the CTO of Richmond AI and Blockchain Consulting. He is Mark Wazzer. Mark, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And I think it would do you justice to maybe introduce yourself, give a little bit about your background, and maybe how you got involved in AI and machine learning, because you seem to be doing it for a long time. You've been in technology for a long time.
So basically, my degree was in artificial intelligence way back far too many decades ago. And I've been doing artificial intelligence work probably 50% of the time since then. I shouldn't go back too far because a lot of these things are obsolete, but initially I was doing expert systems and creating expert shells for banks, had a project with Citicorp. I was developing neural networks when you actually needed special hardware for them. We had what were called Delta boards so that we could actually train the neural networks in a timely fashion. I've been doing a lot of natural language stuff. And of course, I'm very, very interested in artificial general intelligence. And I'm actually an advisor and on the board for the AGI laboratory over in Seattle. Besides that, I've been interested in blockchain for a half dozen years. I've been CTO of the government blockchain for, I guess, a couple of years now. And I'm sure that you'll have plenty of questions about that later.
Oh, yeah. I think a good place to start is, how did you discover cryptocurrency and what intrigued you about blockchain technology specifically?
So I've been vaguely aware of cryptocurrency for probably 8 or so years. I missed the first few years of Bitcoin. How I got heavily involved actually was with Steam, the blogging blockchain. That was interesting because I enjoy writing and you could actually make money writing. So that was very interesting. As I got more into it, there was the opportunity to actually start looking at the blockchain. Steam pays money for curating what is a good post as well as writing. So I actually created a bot that did my curation for me. There were a lot of people who did and still are doing it. Generally, when you're curating, you only make money if other people agree with you that it is a good blog post. But generally, if you just immediately upvote good authors that you know, you can actually get a fair amount in curation awards. You're only allowed so many votes per day. But if you're voting on people who are generally the highest earners, you can actually do very well. So I got into those bots and then I sort of expanded from there. In terms of cryptocurrency, I am not heavily into cryptocurrency. I'm much more interested in either blockchain gaming, or of course, my work is fundamentally creating blockchain applications for government.
Right. And blockchain gaming is actually becoming a really big thing right now. On my Twitter feed, I'm seeing a lot of stuff about a lot of different NFT projects, blockchain games. Are there any projects in particular that you're excited about or maybe even working on?
So I'm not working on any of the blockchain games. However, I've been playing Splinterlands for a couple of years now. Um, One very interesting fact is that the value of the cards that you collect has basically increased over fourfold in the past 6 months. So I've actually made a good amount of money there if I sell my cards. There are also tournaments for a decent amount of money if you're good and things of that sort. Other games that are interesting, Project Nebula is an interesting one. There is an interesting merger of Minecraft and um, a blockchain, which is called Uplift World. And that's a lot of fun if you're into Minecraft, and it doesn't involve that much blockchain, though actually any good blockchain game really is fun to play, and you don't necessarily have to pay much attention at all to the blockchain. The blockchain is just infrastructure, ensuring that you actually own your assets in the game, whether they be cards, whether they be land or spaceships or anything else. There are also a lot of bad blockchain games out there. Uh, Alien Worlds springs to mind. There really is no game there other than setting up your mining rigs and just clicking every so often to mine. A lot of people, though, made a tremendous amount of money on it. Blockchain games, the ones that succeed, the early movers make a lot of money. And it's very interesting. It's the reason why I don't invest in cryptocurrency for the most part is because of the volatility of the market.
Mhm.
Liquidity pools tend to be very worthwhile. You probably don't want to invest in the ones with the obscenely high um, annual percentage returns, because generally what happens is those obscenely high annual percentage returns are in their currency. And generally what happens is that while you're making 400 percent a year, the coin drops to less than a quarter of its value. So you actually end up losing money despite that. For me, where I've made a lot of money is that a lot of the games actually reward you with the in-game currency for being part of their liquidity pool. And that's actually a stable way to make money, because generally you can turn the in-game currency into real currency.
Right. And there's actually one in particular that I've been following closely because it's gaining a lot of traction currently. That's Axie Infinity. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. I actually messaged somebody that's a gamer on there, trying to maybe get him on the show. I've watched some of his videos on YouTube, and I'm not a big gamer myself, but that does interest me because I do see the potential there, especially financially, and that seems to be the case in most things in the crypto ecosystem. If you can get in early, you're probably going to make a good yield. Now, I think it would be important to even touch on the metaverse when we're talking about blockchain video games, because I think that the blockchain is going to be crucial as we enter into this new world of gaming, i.e., metaverse. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, one of the questions is which metaverse?
Fair.
There are a good number of blockchain and blockchain gaming projects that are merging, but there are definitely very discrete, currently walled gardens. A blockchain game can generally join one set, but generally can't join more than one set. Um, it Watching Splinterlands, it's been spreading across blockchains, but normally to join a metaverse, generally your assets should be usable across games. in that metaverse. The projects that are joining and creating metaverses are generally designed to do that from the get-go, but I expect to see a lot more games doing that. I think it will also raise the quality of playability. People can focus less on designing the assets and much more on designing their games and the like.
Right. And I think that, that even ties into some of the work you're doing, not directly with games, but the interoperability. Because for the Government Blockchain Association, I know there's one project in particular that you're working on. It's the Government Business Blockchain Platform. So if you want to go into a little bit about that, because that's essentially like a marketplace for government work, whether it be bonds, marriage license, driver's license, voting, etc. So you'll do a much better job at explaining it than me.
Sure. So the Government Business Blockchain Platform is actually the crown jewel of the GBA, Government Blockchain Association. Fundamentally, it's a blockchain interconnection fabric. We have a core Besu blockchain. Besu is the hyperledger version of Ethereum. It's proof of authority, so it's private. We only allow GBA members on the core blockchain. So it's very well protected. And we also have the gas prices set to 0. So transactions are free. You spend gas, but the gas costs you absolutely nothing to get. We're actually running the majority of nodes for the network, the Besu network, on Raspberry Pis, the little $100 hobbyist computers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have them spread pretty much all over the world. GBA members really exist in most countries. We've got chapters in some large number of countries. I believe it's on the order of 80-ish. I really should keep up to date on that number. So we've got our Besu network, and then we build gateways to various other blockchains. This is something that a number of projects are attempting to do and are doing with varying degrees of success. We are very happy with our method because it's very simple. About the only capability that it doesn't have is to have on blockchain atomic transactions. Um, Atomic transactions are basically things like cryptocurrency swaps.
Mm-hmm.
In one sense, it's very, very nice to have those safely on chain. However, there are a lot of applications. For instance, all exchanges are basically performing atomic swaps, but they're actually off-chain. And DEXs do atomic swaps for their various wrapped coins if they're on the same blockchain, but there are times when they switch blockchains. And again, in that case, it's no longer an atomic transaction. So other projects that are worth mentioning are Cosmos. The only downside of Cosmos is that you've got to build your client on top of their basis. There's Polkadot, has good interconnection, but fundamentally you have to win one of their candle auctions in order to connect to them. There's also the Hyperledger Cactus project, which is trying to connect disparate blockchains the same way in which we're doing, but they're sort of bogged down in trying to figure out the best way to do atomic transactions, and it really prevents them from successfully, moving forward. We have a cross-blockchain token, actually several, but we can ship tokens around from blockchain to blockchain to blockchain. One of our demo slash tutorials involves shipping a token from the Hive blockchain. That's one of the, or the fork of Steem, once Steem was taken over by Justin Sun and Tron. But basically shipping a token from Hive, of course, through the GBA Besu hub over to Ethereum. And you can do that really as easily as you can ship any other token within a blockchain, of course, with the addition that you have to say what blockchain you're shipping it to, in addition to the address on that blockchain. What's worthwhile about that is then we can actually sell services from blockchain to blockchain to blockchain. There are specialized blockchains like Gnosis, blockchains that do arbitration, prediction markets, things of that sort. And it would be wonderful if the specialized services that they offer were available on any blockchain. Right now, blockchains or earlier blockchains have the problem that they're a jack of all trades, so they're not optimized for anything in particular. And you also have to reinvent the wheel. So we're looking forward to a world where blockchains are specialists in what they do, and that if you need services other than your standard services, you just buy them from someone else. I mean, fundamentally, it's like a village. Everyone's good at what they're good at, and the cross-blockchain token is basically your currency to trade services. In addition to that, we are finalizing just a marketplace where we can offer and sell all the services on all the connected blockchains. So as you mentioned, we are also creating solutions that run off of our core Besu hub, or we're actually setting up additional Besu hubs just to allow additional access. And if we ever have any sort of scaling issues, it's very easy to set up another Besu hub. We're also setting up Besu hubs for various government jurisdictions. They are much happier if the blockchains that their applications are on are under their control often. Among those white box applications are, as you mentioned, we're looking at a voting application, driver's licenses, land registry type applications. That's actually one that it looks like will be moving forward very shortly in Colombia, actually, in Bogota. And fundamentally, we just want to expand the ecosystem, get as many services as possible, and make them available to as many governments as possible.
Right. Have you guys talked to El Salvador?
So I believe that we have a chapter in El Salvador. Unfortunately, there are so many projects going on, and I am so buried that maybe you should get our director, Gerard Daché, on, because
Okay.
he actually has his, fingers on everything, whereas I can get buried in the technology projects a lot of the time.
Right. I actually think I watched the interview with you and him on Dragon Chain. I believe that YouTube channel. They're also another blockchain that's doing something similar, and I think you guys may even be working with each other, if I'm not mistaken. Right.
Yes.
Right on. Now, I do have a question about the blockchain that you're using. I know that it's like a multi-chain, like the interoperability, but you said that it's only accessible to GBA members. So is it sort of like a private public blockchain then?
So the Besu is a private blockchain. You can set security so that only certain people can access nodes. The core blockchain will transmit instructions from other blockchains, but we do not want non-GBA members actually accessing the blockchain itself.
Makes sense. It makes it more secure. It
Yes.
makes complete sense. Now, I know you mentioned it in passing, the scalability. I know a big criticism with people who are knowledgeable in blockchain is that it may not be compatible for everything because the scalability issue. You want typically centralization is good for scaling, and when we're talking about governance and businesses, um, maybe other databases would be advantageous for them as opposed to the blockchain. But you guys are obviously thinking the opposite of that, and I was just curious as to why that is. I know there's censorship resistance when it comes to blockchain, but there's the issue that we've been talking about since the inception of Bitcoin is scalability.
So Bitcoin's scalability problems are fundamentally due to the algorithm by which it achieves consensus on what should be written to the blockchain. Bitcoin has decided, or Satoshi originally invented proof of work, where basically the odds of you being able to choose what block is written is proportional to your computing power that you throw at it. And that's why Bitcoin has the energy usage of a small country. My personal opinion is that it would be nice if, for example, Joe Biden decided that Bitcoin was entirely contrary to his environmental agenda and just banned it. The Bitcoin maximalists, of course, say that no government can stop Bitcoin, and they're absolutely correct in one sense. However, Bitcoin really, really depends upon the exchanges and the markets to have its value. And fundamentally, if something like that happened, if a number of countries decided to ban Bitcoin being traded and the like, I think that the value would plummet to the point where it wouldn't be worth mining fundamentally. The miners could move on to something else. Um, so it would be interesting. Bitcoin really serves no purpose that other blockchains don't serve better. Other blockchains, Ethereum is planning on moving to proof of stake shortly. Proof of stake, the consensus mechanism depends on how much Ethereum you own. So it's not anywhere near as expensive as Bitcoin, or rather, once they switch, it won't be anywhere near as expensive as Bitcoin. There are quite a number of it's called proof of authority Ethereum. The Besu's proof of authority, it's the private Ethereum. If you've heard of Binance Smart Chain, it's a proof of authority Ethereum like our Besu network. They have the gas prices set so they're similar to what Ethereum's gas prices were before the huge run up last year. So a lot of people are moving from Ethereum to the Binance Smart Chain. Others are moving towards layer 2 of Ethereum. Fundamentally, there are enhancements to Ethereum where gas prices are nearly negligible. The problem with those different layer 2 uh, ecosystems is that they each have a cryptocurrency of their own, and currently they're not easily interoperable, but they're actually very good for certain things, including NFTs, non-fungible tokens.
Right. Now, What do you think about the multi-chain, not multi-chain, the multi-token world that so many people are talking about? I mean, it seems to me it's going to be inefficient to have a bunch of tokens to do a bunch of different things. It would be wiser to have maybe a couple tokens and have them be, be able to bridge between multiple chains.
So you can currently bridge from one chain to another if you're willing to go through either an exchange or a DEX. However, it really, really is inconvenient. It would be very nice if we could all settle on one token, that token is available across all exchanges, or at least if it were able to be converted on each individual blockchain. Each blockchain really is going to need to keep its own private token, but there's really no reason why it can't also have the generic token. That would make life a lot easier. There wouldn't need to be nearly the amount of um, people sending the various or exchanging the various cryptocurrencies on both exchanges and dexes. Dexes are very interesting. They make it a lot easier to convert tokens. Unfortunately, the fees tend to be reasonably high. The DEX fees are what pays off the liquidity pools. A large amount of infrastructure and cryptocurrency sales would go away if people did have a single cryptocurrency available and if each blockchain could convert to it easily. Um, on some weekend days when I'm shifting my gaming money around, um, there are instances where to get something from one place to another, I normally have to go through 2 or 3 either dexes or exchanges. And that can be particularly detrimental if your mobile breaks and you can't log on to any exchange without your two-factor authentication. I went through that last week and I was not a happy camper till I got my new phone.
Oh man, I can imagine. I know when Ethereum's gas prices were going through the roof during this bull market, there were some decentralized, some DeFi projects that I wanted to get into, but the cost to swap was ridiculous. I just couldn't see it. It would like prevent me from buying the quantity that I could if the gas fees weren't so high. So yeah, it is pretty annoying. And like I said, I'm not much of a gamer, so I don't do a lot of what you were saying as far as your gaming tokens, but I can see the frustration in that. Um, Now, switching up a little bit here, because I know you're a philosopher too. You have your bachelor's degree in philosophy, and I was on your blog, Wisdom. I love the name, by the way. I thought that was really funny when I saw that. And I was reading a couple of your posts, and I also saw an interview you did maybe 3 years ago with Washington Elite or something along those lines. And he asked you, what motivates you? And you responded that you were like, the world's heading in a bad direction. And so that appears to be your motivation. And I would assume you are so interested in blockchain because of the potential to change government. And that's why it seems to be focusing solely on working with governments. Could you maybe explain a little bit of your thinking process as far as, or maybe your philosophy on how, or worldview on how blockchain is going to help change uh, governance?
Right. So there's a very important distinction between governance and governments.
Okay.
It would be ideal if we could have distributed processes that govern various things that were much closer to those things. Um, Depending on whether you believe in large government or small government generally ends up just meaning that the governance has devolved down to smaller jurisdictions, a lot closer to the people. This has the disadvantage of not having economies of scale, but it certainly has the advantages that it tends to be a bit more effective. And again, the converse is that large governments can have great economies of scale, but then it's a one size fits all type solution. I actually got interested in blockchain more to educate a artificial human level entity, the so-called AGI. Ever since Eliezer Yudkowsky's paper from 2004 about friendly AI and how AGI could very easily go horribly wrong, that's been a very interesting subject for me. There are many people who are thoroughly convinced that uh, AGI, when it is developed, will decide to kill us all and basically use all the resources that we represent for themselves. I believe totally the opposite. If we're smart about how we do this, we will be able to create at least human level entities, maybe very slightly better, but fundamentally, any tool that an AGI can use, a human being can use as well. The fundamental core of a mind is likely to be the same. The AGI's core mind will be a lot faster, being in silicon rather than carbon. But given the fact that most of what makes a mind smart is the tools that it's using, I don't really anticipate a situation where AGI is likely to be that much smarter than humans. And I think it should be easily possible to convince a wise AGI that diversity is really important, that different methods of approaching problems is very useful. And one of the first explorations that I did was I read Yudkowsky's paper and Eric Baum's follow-up paper on the basic AI drives and thought, well, that's true at a low level for humans, but we don't have the same problems. What is the difference? Some of the best lines from Eric Baum's paper is where he explains that one of the fundamental drives of all intelligent creatures, or at least all creatures that are able to survive, is to procure resources. And Eric Baum said that this need to procure resources could basically drive an AGI towards sociopathic behavior. And he actually used that term. So the question is, why isn't this true of human beings? Um, so that there are two answers there. One is that human beings are what is called obligatorily gregarious. Fundamentally, we need to operate in groups because that's the only way evolutionarily we survived. Um, we know how to work together, or at least we used to. We formed communities so that we could survive, and we learned that community is more effective than selfishness. Um, some of those who are concerned about AGI are concerned that the only reason why we behave is because being embedded in a society of equals makes us behave. No one can really get out of control without there being serious repercussions. Um, at any rate, so over the years, I've been looking a lot at the case of human beings, what makes life work for us. I spent a number of years looking at the human moral sense. A lot of researchers did work on that in the um, era between about 2005 and 2010. However, what I considered the real breakthrough, Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, if you're familiar with him, and he's done a lot of work on politics and his pillars of morality. But for me, what was his most illuminating work is in the Handbook of Social Psychology. He wrote the chapter on morality. And fundamentally, he said, the definition of morality, we've been going about it all wrong because circumstances are different for different cultures. The history is different, and history definitely derives cultural things like morality. He says, however, all morality has the same function, and it only takes a sentence to describe it. Fundamentally, morality is to suppress or regulate selfishness and to make it possible to live together cooperatively. Um, and it's interesting that it first focused on selfishness because this is exactly the drive towards resources that make, or at least that made Eric Baum say that AGI was so dangerous. This is obviously a drive that we as intelligent creatures have, or surviving creatures have, but it is morality that helps us suppress it, that helps us work together. So this is all a long diversion because a lot of why I got into blockchain was that, first of all, it makes you accountable for your actions. If more of your actions are recorded, or at least the critical decisions are recorded, though I can get into the downsides of doing that later, um, it does mean that if you do something wrong, um, it's obvious to others, and there are ways of taking remedial action. You could even set up smart contracts that automatically assess remedial reactions. For instance, the transfer of some funds away from you, i.e. a fine.
Proof of stake helps with that a little bit too. It keeps the validators honest, and if they try to manipulate the system, they can lose all their money. So
And it's very interesting too. I'm surprised that governments haven't started outlawing privacy coins yet, the
like
so-called
Monero.
coins with total anonymity. Bitcoin really isn't a problem these days for the governments. They're able to do tracking in terms of just following the money in the network. And once there are enough transactions, they get a good enough network map that they can generally figure out who is making a given transaction. But Monero has the problem that is exactly what I was talking about before. A bad actor can really do anything with Monero, and you're not going to be able to trace down the source of funds. People are generally very good. What's actually surprising, I forget who said this, it might be Wilson, but what's surprising is how good human beings actually are even when no one's watching, and when there aren't consequences. And this is probably the reason why we haven't had tremendous numbers of problems yet, like people hiring assassins across the internet and paying with Monero and things of that sort. But the other thing that is interesting to me is to see if it's possible to build an AGI with a moral sense. And there are two different ways of doing this. There was a great book by Wendell Wallach and Colin Allen called Machine Morality. And they clearly identified the fact that there was both bottom-up morality and top-down morality. And bottom-up morality in human beings is basically our feelings, our emotions. We feel bad when we do something mean to someone else. We get warm fuzzies when we do something good. We're squeamish about certain things. Generally, our emotional reactions are very, very good guides to what we should do. We actually are very, very bad about explaining necessarily why we made the decisions that we made. There's a great book, sorry, not a book, but a great paper on the intuitive tail wagging the logical dog. There are studies that actually show that human beings get it wrong when they're asked to describe why they made the moral decisions that they made. So we are basically bottom up driven on morality, but we are top down when we're explaining why we did what we did. This is because we necessarily need to explain to our society why we did what we did if our society believes that we did something wrong. But this is actually an after the fact, uneducated guess as to why we did what we did. It doesn't represent reality at all. And human beings have actually evolved so that we deceive ourselves. There's, again, a lot of great research by Robert Trivers on this. And so fundamentally, if an AGI is designed properly, it can actually be much more moral than a human being, because it will actually be able to understand why it made the decisions that it made, as opposed to humans where it's entirely disconnected. One of the projects that the AGI laboratory is working on out in Seattle is an emotion-based artificial intelligence. Pluchik is an evolutionary biologist who has a very good psychoevolutionary model of emotions. There are 8 basic emotions. Generally, they're each triggered by some standard things. You feel fear when you're threatened, and then you have a specific behavior. If there's something unusual, you're surprised, you have a specific behavior. And fundamentally, what they're doing out in the AGI lab is having an AGI with an internal state of emotions. Certain things change those emotions. The AGI is aware of what emotions it is having, and has some small ability to change them, but fundamentally it's reacting very similarly to how a human being would react. One advantage, of course, is that it does have the capabilities of introspection in terms of what's exactly causing those emotions. The next step is to try to figure out a way in which we can start with top-down emotion and bring it all the way down to that level. One of the reasons why I've taken a sidetrack into blockchain is that I believe that it's possible to crowdsource knowledge much more effectively with the blockchain, because people with good reputations can't spam the system. People with good ideas can be rewarded. Um, the blockchain is just a large common system for crowdsourcing. And I think that would be useful both for designing a logical moral structure that makes sense to everyone. I think it would actually be very, very good also for designing the AGI itself. One of the views of AGI, there's really a spectrum on the views of AGI. One is that there's some master algorithm that will solve everything. There are the people that believe that neural networks will make it possible to do anything. And it's kind of obvious on one hand because human beings are made up of neural networks. But on the other hand, human beings have many, many, many different types of nerve cells. Neural networks do not adequately model nerve cells, and it appears as if the nerve cells form very different structures and effectively implement very, very different algorithms. So the other side of the spectrum is that there's a core mind, and fundamentally all the core mind does is it acquires tools. It learns math, it then uses math as a tool. Um, it's also very interesting because it even does this in a bodily fashion. For instance, when you're driving, you can feel the rear wheel slip, for example, and things of that sort. So the thing that is most important about the human mind is how is its integration of tools, and probably the way in which we'll be able to create an AGI is if we can come up with that core mind that can incorporate anything that it runs across that would be useful. So I've sort of run all over the place here,
You
but
did, and
that's
that's
sort of been my
laughable.
motivation over the past dozen or so years.
Yeah, that was really all. You covered a lot of topics there, and I really do appreciate that. I want to circle back around to when you said you don't believe that AGI will necessarily surpass us in intelligence. You're probably one of the first people I know that's an expert in the field that has made a statement like that. I tend to agree. Actually, that's always kind of been my point of view. I just don't see how we would be able to create something that would be more intelligent than us. And then I think that this would also circle back to the transhumanist movement, in that it's all about the cooperation between man and technology, which is fits perfect in game theory, which you have that, it seems, in AI and then also in blockchain, which may be another interest of yours, something that you saw the game theory in both, because that's something I first learned about game theory through Bitcoin when I first learned about Bitcoin, and then learning more about artificial intelligence and stuff like that. You learn about that, and so I did want to circle back around to well, actually, to stay right on the artificial intelligence and actually go back to video games. I I actually found out that this is already being done, but it seems to me that a good way that to train the artificial intelligence before they actually become the silicon, actual physical entities in the real world operating with us is through video games, actually. And maybe even the metaverse would contribute to that because that's actually their home. That's always been like that. That's been my thinking. Like, I think it would be more likely to have a nefarious actor as far as an AI or an AGI goes in the digital world as opposed to the physical world.
So there's a lot to cover there. They have been doing video games for a number of years, most often with the reinforcement learning type systems, most recently with the neural network systems and deep neural nets. They are very good at the video games. They're well past human capability, but of course the same thing is true in Go and a number of other instances. Doing things in a virtual world tends to be much easier than doing it in the physical world. Our capability at robotics is lagging a bit behind, but not as far as a number of people believe. Some of the most impressive robotics types effort are those of Boston Dynamics. I assume that you've seen the various videos. What's very interesting is to watch things like Big Dog when it's slipping on ice and things of that sort, where it appears as if it's actually alive. It's got the same recovery mechanisms as animals do, because fundamentally, those are the best evolved tactics. And the neural networks for Big Dog are very, very similar to the very, very simple neural networks that are necessary for bodily control. But that being said, what neural networks aren't particularly good at is logical thought. Neural networks are basically pattern recognizers.
Mhm.
One of the best uses of deep neural networks is that they're very, very good at imitating vision. If you look at the layers of the visual cortex, it's exactly a deep neural network. There's a layer that identifies lines, then there's a layer that identifies orientation of those lines, then there's something that starts identifying shapes, and on up you go. And they actually have created, Andrew Ng has created deep neural networks that basically are identical to the human visual cortex. They cheated a little bit so that they converged on the same converged on sort of the same patterns of what is analyzed where. The human mind, when it starts, is definitely not tabula rasa. It's not an empty slate. There are sort of very interesting proofs of this. Watch how an infant reacts to a snake. It's not necessarily something that they're afraid of, but it's something that will attract their attention far more than any other similar object. So human beings have a lot of initial evolutionarily programmed particular algorithms or things where with most deep neural networks, it would actually take geological time and a tremendous amount of computing power to evolve to the optimal solutions. That's why I mentioned that he had to cheat a bit to get it to optimize to the same as the human visual cortex. That has had, generations and generations and generations of evolution. And again, the human mind is far superior to neural networks in terms of learning. Neural networks do great because they've got far more um, data than a human ever runs across. But then again, the computational power is insane. Neural networks are great at recognition. They perform at least at human level and sometimes much better. But really all that they're doing is mapping a state space. They have no clue of what they're doing. They're just saying, this piece of data looked like that piece of data looked like that piece of data. And as a result, too, the explanations are very, very bad. So.
When you were talking about the baby, and if the baby sees a snake, it's going to react a certain way, it uh, sparked my mind thinking about epigenetics, because that's sort of what you're referring to. And so I have two questions here. Do you Are artificial intelligence using something akin to epigenetics? And also, when you're talking about visualizing, I remember hearing from Dr. Jordan Peterson. He's no AI scientist or anything, but he mentioned one of the things that artificial intelligent developers are having a hard time training the AI to do is object recognition. So maybe they can see it, but they're not going to be able to necessarily know that, oh, this is a water bottle. They're going to see the object, but they may not be able to recognize it. So are there any advancements in that?
So object recognition has actually gotten very good.
Okay.
Initially, with artificial intelligence, there was what's known as Harnaud's grounding problem. This was back when artificial intelligence was primarily symbolic, and it wasn't really tied to the world. And most often when people attempted to tie it to the world, they were doing it by logical descriptions. And fundamentally, this is inappropriate because this isn't how your mind recognizes things. So neural networks these days do a great job of identifying objects, even from pictures, for instance. There have been a number of years where neural networks have been able to identify cats as opposed to dogs on the internet. And it's tougher to train a system in 3D, but 3D also gives a lot more information that makes it easier. So object recognition for objects that a neural network has been sufficiently trained upon is fairly easy currently. So it's no longer the bottleneck that it used to be. What needs to be tied together is this object recognition, which is done by neural networks, a sub-symbolic level, and have it actually turned into symbols that then a symbolic, logical mind can manipulate. Um, a lot of research is being done currently on this bridge. Uh, DeepMind actually believes that you can have neural networks on both sides of the divide. This is how their AlphaGo and AlphaZero were designed. But I do think that neural networks aren't the most efficient way to do symbolic type thought. So we'll see how that shakes out in the end. DeepMind has done amazing things. That they're Go playing machine that can beat humans is absolutely amazing. But on the other hand, a lot of the reason why it's so successful is because of the sheer amount of computing power that they were able to throw at it. Um, DeepMind had a reasonable percentage of the computing power that humans have spent throughout the history of Go, which is really scary. It also explored a lot more of the state space than human beings did. Most human beings stick to established openings and
Mhm.
do what is known best, whereas AlphaGo did a lot more exploration. And that's why it had that one move in the famous or infamous Go tournament where, you know, it did something totally out of left field and everyone was stunned, but that won the game for AlphaGo. So
Do you play Go at all?
I've played some, but it's been a number of years, and trying to find a Go partner before they were available online was difficult.
Right. Yeah, yeah, my wife and I, we because of me, I'm really into like Chinese history. I have a lot of Chinese literature, and I learned how to play chess, but I'm more of a creative mind, so the restrictions in chess kind of, deterred me a little bit. And then I learned about Go, and as you said, the robot, the AI was able to create its own moves, and I fell in love with Go. I haven't played it in a while because, as you say, there's not too many people that actually play it. But anyway, circling back to the epigenetic question, I think a better way that I could phrase that would be, I think that there was this company or something along those lines. I think it was called Uber. I don't necessarily know if it's like the driving company, but they were doing something with machine learning where it was unique. It was innovative in that the robot or whatever in an environment could learn from other environments. So maybe that's a better way to frame that. Is there, like, what are your thoughts on that?
So one of the side areas of research are what is called transfer learning. It would be very useful if machines could think in terms of analogies so that it picks up very good, complete knowledge that it has in one domain and is able to get a great start in another domain in terms of where the overlaps are. Math is the same throughout virtually all fields. So if you have a deep understanding of many things, you tend to be very quick at picking up other things, you know. Big shout out here for systems engineers, because generally they can approach most fields um, in terms of understanding them. They're better than many of the experts, but they don't have the domain specific knowledge so that the experts generally do a much better job. However, in terms of fixing things or debugging them, very often a systems engineer can come along with very, very little knowledge and say, you know, this is why you have this problem, or this is where you've created some inconsistencies. And when you reach this edge case, you're going to have a problem. There are also what are called genetic algorithms. This is more along the lines of purely symbolic AI, but what it has is both the mutations and the rearrangement of genetics. Um, so it can conceivably converge to solutions. Um, it was in there was a good number of people who were very interested in it for a while. Um, I'm not sure that there has been that much research on it recently. One of the things that is very important for such evolution is so-called encapsulation and modularization. Um, Things need to work the same way that they very often work in biology, and that is that there are separate systems at each level, and each system is used as a complete building block for the next level. And that's something that we as computer scientists have talked about a lot. And when we're doing programming, it's a very good programming practice, but it hasn't been incorporated into most AI and AGI as much as I believe it should be.
Okay. Now, from our conversation and a little bit of work that I've seen you do on YouTube and the case study and the law firms, you seem to, you're a problem solver. You see a problem, you want to solve the problem. And one problem that I saw that really concerned you is climate change. Now, in the work that you're doing, both in artificial intelligence and blockchain technology, do you see do you see them in any way contributing positively to the mitigation of climate change at all? Or
Unfortunately not. Um, I'm not sure what we're going to do about climate change. I think I know which particular podcast you were talking about. I believe it was now I can't think of it, but the combination AI and blockchain one a couple years back.
Mhm.
Um, for me, the scariest thing about climate change is that I was at a Governance of Emerging Technologies conference a couple of years ago, and most of the climate experts were saying, well, you know, global warming isn't going to be a problem because what's going to happen is that a country like India is going to be so badly affected that they're going to try something like putting aerosolized particles high in the atmosphere to start blocking the sun and things of that sort. Apparently, they have the infrastructure, the necessary planes, the chemical capabilities, and the like, that if they decided to have a Manhattan Project, they actually could do it for the world. But of course, then the question is, so what are all the side effects? Because generally these particles are acidic, um, you know, and we'll really be in a situation where we don't know what comes next. There are two different meanings for the word singularity. Werner Vinge basically says that the singularity will come about when we have human level intelligences. Another meaning is a discontinuity in a function, but the one that's always fascinated me is it's when we don't know what's coming next. And arguably, by that definition, we've entered the singularity. Our prediction power is very, very low, dangerously so. And it's also had the interesting side effect that it's basically killed science fiction. There's very little science fiction anymore. There's space operas, there's urban fantasy, but pretty much all science fiction that you've seen is obsolete and or has magical technology. You look at Star Trek and how stupid the computer is. You look at all the time travel movies and there is no explanation whatsoever there. Um, basically we've pretty much arrived at the future that we expected, and it's almost as if we can't envision anymore.
It does appear that way, that that we're not as creative as we once were. And I know that there's a professor on YouTube that I listen to quite frequently. His name is Professor Edward Dunton. He is, I believe, he's in psychology or sociology, and he talks a lot about the decline in IQ in Western civilization. And he's more so pessimistic about where we're heading, and contributes the decline in IQ to a lot of problems, such as the what was it, the South Side Florida, or South, that building in Florida that collapsed in Miami, I believe. And so the deterioration of a lot of things. I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think that we're just experiencing a change, a drastic change, and we just see a lot of systems dying currently, and we're trying to adapt to this paradigm shift, which is hitting so many industries and so many ideologies, which is why I think we have polarization, like extreme polarization. And, because extremism really only happens when it's like a survival tool. It's like a defense mechanism. You corner an animal, they're going to do everything they can to survive. And that's what we're seeing with so many things. And I was, I can't remember where I heard this, but I thought it was spot on, and I haven't heard it articulated this way, that Bitcoin was actually the financial singularity, is when we entered the financial singularity. And I thought that was spot on. Now, to switch it up a little bit, we were talking about artificial intelligence, climate change, blockchain. Another thing that's emerging, and I think that this will help. I know there's even controversy when it comes to climate change. Some people think it's warming, some people think it's cooling. To be quite honest, I see evidence for both. I know that I've read articles that there's actually more ice in the glaciers now, but then you also read contradicting articles. So I take the stance of, there's definitely some change going on. How much effect do we have on it? I'm not too sure, but we do have an effect. I'm more so of the opinion that, um, you know, the earth will take care of itself. And obviously, we have a symbiotic relationship with nature. So I know we play a role in that, but I guess I'm not as concerned about it as some people are. But where I was going with this is smart cities. I think smart cities and their development, they're obviously going to be using artificial intelligence. I think there's going to be that's where you'll see the rise of governments using blockchain technology. In Nevada, for example, they're working on a piece of legislation to allow corporations to take over unincorporated towns. And one of the first corporations I think that are trailblazing that is actually Blockchain LLC. And they're creating digital identities and smart cities. And so, what are your thoughts on smart cities and yeah, and everything else that we've been talking about? Because they're going to incorporate everything.
Yeah, smart cities are awesome. And you don't even necessarily really need AI to run smart cities. In one sense, they're just concentrated technology. A lot of what blockchain is used for is the collecting of data and the collecting of opinions to give you great histories and give you great governance at that level. Smart cities are going to be very, very good for making it easier for people to work and live together. However, it's going to be a very interesting problem socially. It will be much, much easier to continue the path of manipulation of human beings that we're already seeing. There's a great book, I think it's by Marshall Brain, but it's called Mana.
Mm.
And that's very, very worthwhile to read because it basically shows two very different futures. One is a future where humans are fundamentally enslaved by the algorithms that we create. Just the fact, and some of it's happening already in warehouses. We have people that are basically sent from place to place by the algorithm. They're told what to do. They're told when they're allowed to take a break. Their effectiveness is measured by an algorithm. Really, the human is virtually a paid slave to the algorithm. And this is very bad because you're really putting the human in a situation that we're not designed for. And it's bad for our physical health, it's bad for our mental health and everything else. And there's also a contrary future where instead of it basically being the capitalist society, the unbridled capitalism that allows for the redistribution of value upwards to just the richest and everyone else suffers, they actually invested in making the world a better place for everyone. And it's a very, very stark contrast, but you can really see both directions happening currently. Um, I'm not sure, to go back to one of your other points, that Bitcoin was necessarily the only financial singularity. At the same time, you were also seeing derivatives really come to the fore with the 2008 crash. There's also high frequency trading where things are being taken over by algorithms. Once again, it's a case where systems are being driven um, further and further towards the edges. There are many more behaviors that we can't anticipate. Things get much more complex. Uh, I would disagree with the statement that we have lower IQs. There are sort of two different but complementary ways of looking at things. One is that if you use the definition of intelligence that the AGI folk often use, which is the ability to perform, a wide variety of tasks in a wide variety of environments, human beings are much, much smarter than they used to be. Um, Watching the combination of my wife and YouTube is really scary when she goes off and does refrigerator repair. That's not something that anyone would have imagined years ago. But look, there's a YouTube thing, the repairman, can't show up for 2 weeks, is going to charge me an arm and a leg, isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. And so she just goes, orders the parts, does it, and it's like, okay, that's kind of scary. uh, on the other hand, we are bombarded by so many complex things that there is much, much more that our IQ has to do. There are definitely um, individuals who have not, developed as fully. Um, and we also have more exposure to those individuals. In the past, you normally hung out with your intellectual equivalents. whereas now you do tend to see the full spectrum. And given that in the past, I think that you've always heard of geniuses and have gotten the impression that they're more numerous than they are, for a lot of people, it's a shock to realize how many people are out there who are the exact opposite. In terms of infrastructure, fundamentally, that's again an effect of unbridled capitalism. Um, if you're trying to make the most money, you cut corners, you shave margins. Fundamentally, that's what happened to Texas this past winter. They optimized for money and they didn't optimize for safety. We're also reaching the point where things, as they happen faster and faster, we develop a shorter and shorter time frame. If something, if something is dangerous but unlikely to happen, we start ignoring it. And this is why infrastructure is a real problem. It's disintegrating around us, but the time scale in terms of its degradation and also its repair is long enough that it's not in the time scale we're used to working on until it becomes a disaster and you have to do something now. But even then, it takes too long to repair.
Right. And you may get some conspiracy theorists in here saying, well, that's the plan, order out of chaos, the whole Freemason thing.
Most of the time, I generally don't believe conspiracies because of the number of people that have to be involved.
Right.
I mean, there are one or two conspiracy theories that I could buy into because they could have been done by a small number of people. But, in general, what's killing us is just the natural evolution of our systems. There is a book by Eliezer Yudkowsky. It's available for free on the internet. It's very, very worthwhile to read. It's called Inadequate Equilibria. And it's a lot of game theory, so you would enjoy it. And basically, it explains why our systems seem to always go in the wrong direction. And mostly it's because of lack of coordination. And again, getting back to blockchain, blockchain is designed for coordination in a trustless environment. It may be one of those things that might be able to start dragging us out of some of these problems.
Right. Now, I do have to circle, but I know I said it jokingly, the conspiracy theorist stuff. But in all honesty, just to be completely transparent to you and my viewers, I am partial to some conspiracy theories. And I agree with you, though, when it comes to the level of organization. Just to expand a little bit, because this is something that I have thought a lot on. I don't think that there's the level of I don't think the level of organization is needed when you have the compartmentalization that we have in our institutions. So the people at top, so just to be fair, playing devil's advocate here with the conspiracy theorists, because they're not all low IQ. They're all not, some of them are very intelligent, have a lot of really good points. And so just to play devil's advocate here, I think that the point that they make with a lot of these conspiracy theories is that there's a lot of wealthy individuals who have agendas. There's not necessarily cabals there's not necessarily like this global cabal that's controlling everything, rather fractions of wealthy people who sometimes have similar agendas where they converge, and then they implement their plans, and then it trickles down to the point where you get somebody that's maybe working for Google as a developer, and they have no clue as to what exactly the grand scheme of that plan is. I'm not, going to come up with some plan right now, but maybe spying on people. Maybe they have no clue of what the grand scheme of the people running the show are, because it's so compartmentalized. So that's why I'm partial to a lot of conspiracy theories, because that to me makes Not a lot of them, not a lot of them, but some of them, because the compartmentalization is definitely a thing. And there's, you can just, that's our system. That's our world that we live in. You can even see that in regular businesses where you have the accounting department knowing nothing of what the upper management executive team is doing, to a certain degree. But to wrap things up, to bring it full circle, I really enjoyed our conversation. I really think that you have a refreshing take because you're not shying away from the negative aspects of technology, as you mentioned in the book there. There's a lot of negative things that can happen, as you alluded to earlier with blockchain, that the transparency may scare some people, may make conspiracy theorists develop other theories as to why it's a global takeover and they're coming to chip us all, right? So I do appreciate your refreshing, realistic take on where we're heading. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And just to, a couple things. What are you most optimistic about in the future as far as technology goes and its impact on society? And lastly, where can people find your work?
So I think I'm most optimistic about a lot of the medical advances.
Okay.
Uh, in this country, we have an interestingly separated system. It was amazing how fast the vaccine for the coronavirus was developed. Um, Not to mention the fact that it was using a totally new technology that will, quickly spread into other things. Of course, there's the problem that our healthcare distribution is tremendously unfair, and it's also far more expensive than any other country. But technology-wise, that's what I'm most optimistic about. I think that that's where we're going to see a lot of progress over the next probably few years. We technology inherently is neither good nor evil. It's a tool, and like all tools, it depends on how it's used. Um, the best place to probably find a lot of my work is to just search on my name on the internet. Um, I am attending slightly fewer conferences and writing slightly fewer papers than I was before. A lot of this is both because I'm very, very buried with the Government Blockchain Association, but part of it too is that I've figured out a number of things enough that I feel that I actually want to start doing the work on it, in terms of developing the moral system, in terms of the core brain idea, and figuring out the best way to add tools to it, the crowdsourcing, the emotional AI. Um, so there's a lot of my writing out there, but it sort of leads to the ideas of where I am now, where instead of having to think about things, I can actually start doing things.
Right on. Well, Mark, it's been awesome talking with you. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has.